Well, good afternoon. It's certainly a pleasure to be up in front of this group. Steve Seymour, I think I know most of you folks. Used to work for the fisheries department and then ventured into shellfish, serious shellfish farming here about 3 years ago. My son and I have a little business up in Drayton Harbor. It's called Drayton Harbor Oyster Company. Drayton Harbor has a long, long history of oyster production, actually starting around 1900s. Alaska packers brought in oyster seed from the East Coast by railroad car and planted them in Drayton Harbor. The oyster beds in Jersey's coast have justly won a name, but we grow better flavored ones right here in Blaine. That's actually I can't read this. I think it's 1909 Blaine Journal. So even back then, they recognized how unique this small bay was. So from between 1906 and 1985, that was the pre-Seymour Menzies years. There was a number of growers, again, Alaska packers. This little scow here on the bottom is called the Drayton. It was built over on Eliza Island. It was one of the first oyster scows built in the state. Number of different growers farmed Drayton Harbor. So Seymour and Menzies. I started farming oysters in Drayton Harbor in 1985 with a couple of Canadian partners. It was called Neptune Aqua Farms. Shortly after that, I hired Jeff Menzies, and I think most of you have heard of Jeff, if you don't know him personally. He's actually been an amazing piece of this whole puzzle. The first harvest was about 1986 or so, doing single oysters on racks. The last harvest in 1997, when the bay, as I think as Erica mentioned, was closed due to high levels of fecal coliform. And so at that time, I had already moved working for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. My older son, Mike, was working with Jeff at the time, running the farm. So from 2002, when, I think back in 2002, Jeff could have walked away from this. The bay is closed. It's a small urban embayment, had lots of issues, failing septics, farms that had poor practices, stormwater, sewer connections that were crossed with stormwater, a major municipal sewer plant that was really a disaster, just a lot of issues. But in spite of that, Jeff then partnered up with the Puget Sound Restoration Fund, was kind of the sharp stick that started pushing municipalities, the county, the state, to really start stepping up and trying to recover this bay. He really is one of the main heroes, as is the county, the state, the city. I mean, altogether in 20 years of restoration effort, there's probably about $30 million spent on this watershed. It's a lot of money. And sometimes you wonder, well, was it really worth it? I can tell you when I'm out on that bay, my son and I, the only farmer in the bay, harvesting these incredible product with the view of Mount Baker and the wildlife and everything, I said, man, this place has to stay in place for generations to come. It really is truly one of the more magical places we have in Puget Sound. So changing to the guard. I mean, so I retired from fisheries in 2013. Jeff was about ready to, had been running this as a nonprofit. He was ready to see other things. My younger son, Mark, had moved home and from finishing up a degree and working for Simpson Timbers, a fish bio down in California. And we decided we'd go ahead and try this again. So we formed Drayton Harbor Oyster Company, LLD, limited anyway this time. And so a new generation. So farming the mollusks, oyster culture is a little bit of it's a nice mix of science and farming. In this case, we're raising single oyster seed for the half-shell market. We start with little tiny-eyed larvae that, a million in the palm of your hand is about 2 tablespoons. You set them in filtered, heated seawater on little pieces of microculture. They grow, and then they move into a little bigger system called a flupsy down in the harbor, and they stay there till they get thumbnail size, and they move to bags. And then the work begins. You're farming oysters. You're out in the middle of the night. We use, again, a number of different growing systems to produce a kind of product that we're looking for. It's a lot of work, a lot of energy, a lot of money. You have to hire people to help. Payroll in this day and age gets to be a real expensive venture. But the prize, the prize is this really magic oyster. In a year to 2 years, you have this product that basically is incredible. I remember Jerry Yamashita. That's not Yamashita. I just learned that the other night. It's Yamas. Yeah. Anyway, I remember him saying that he just loved to watch them grow. It's magic. You start with this really virtually invisible little animal, and within a year and a half or two, your bed is just blooming with these little critters. And people love them. People pay pretty good money for them. It's really an exciting venture. A few years ago, we ventured into opening up a little store right in Blaine. And, for years, Jeff and I, we'd have these gatherings like this. We'd have, try to get the community to come to talk about preserving Drayton Harbor. We'd have free oyster grills. We'd do all this stuff. And I can remember the last couple ones, nobody came. I mean, we'd be there with 2 dozen agency people and us. And we just could not generate the interest in the community. When Jeff and I were farming the oysters, we were wholesaling the product. We were just a couple of guys out in the bay, a lot of times in the middle of the night. No one knew we were even there. But, and so opening this little store, it's kind of wasn't we think of this, has really opened up the door for that outreach. I mean, we have people now literally by the hundreds coming into this store, and with every person there's an opportunity to tell the story. And Drayton Harbor has a great story that's applicable to anywhere in Puget Sound. I remember Erica's father, Tim Douglas, telling me back when we first started to struggle with water quality back in the late 80s, if we can't solve it in Drayton Harbor, we're not going to solve it in Puget Sound. And it's so true. Drayton Harbor is a relatively small watershed. You can get your arms around the whole basin. You should be able to identify every problem that exists. And I think in most cases, the county, through their efforts in the city, has identified most of the problems that exist, and in many cases have fixed it. And yes, we saw the water quality rebound. So that's really rewarding. And this little store, we had, I think Erica mentioned, last December we finally got the full upgrade. Prior to that, we were closed for 2 or 3 months during the wintertime. So water quality has improved such that now we can harvest oysters year-round, except maybe in a case where we have 2 inches of rain in 24 hours, which is a real downpour. Personally, in the business sense, we closed before that. We can see the bay change. You're out there every day, and it's more like about 1.5 inches or so in 24 hours and stuff. But anyway, we had this celebration. It was in the middle of December. It was when the temperatures were -16 degrees. And we had about 150 people show up for this celebration. The community support is just amazing. I mean, people have all of a sudden realized that they have this precious gem in their backyard. And I keep thinking, how do we take that lesson, and apply it to Portage Bay, for instance, or to the salmon runs? I mean, what we have now, really, if Drayton Harbor, and I'm not naive enough to know that, we've got to continually watch water quality, but, if the bay starts to get downgraded, we've got a lot of public support to try to deal with that. And, in the case of Portage, it's very important to the tribal community, but how many people in Bellingham even know it exists or even give a hoot, And so I keep thinking, how do we change that? I mean, this has been pretty interesting to have this little place that just really is driving one of the more powerful outreach efforts we've ever done. These gatherings are great, but it's not John Q. Public's not here. We're all the choir. And so I don't know, that's just my thoughts. And so I guess I challenge all of us to be thinking how we can use the lessons we learned up there and to try to solve some of these bigger problems. Portage Bay, after looking at Drayton Harbor, Portage Bay is a huge problem. You got so many inputs and so many players. And so anyway, that's kind of it. Thank you.